Welcome, my ghouls, to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark, where we dive into the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright chilling stories and history from Saskatchewan. And sometimes we even extend into other parts of Canada. I'm your host, K.D. Kulpa, and I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher based out of Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm thrilled to embark on this eerie journey into the Saskatchewan and Canadian unknown with all of you. Today, I thought we'd dive into a topic of paranormal investigations, more about the history. So the history of our fascination with ghosts, with UFOs, with the unknown. Given the popularity of ghost investigation television shows, or television shows about aliens, or UFOs, or things that they're digging up that from unknown history, I was really curious when our fascination with these things started. So I started digging into a lot of different websites, research papers, and history to really be able to answer questions like, when was our earliest record of a ghost sighting? Who was the first ever paranormal investigator? And how did they even get into that field? What equipment did they use in those early days of ghosts and supernatural investigations? Do they compare to what we have now? We're going to get into all of this and more in this episode. Although honestly, with everything that I found, this will probably continue on through quite a few episodes. So let's dive in first to our paranormal history. Now, this may be a bit of an unpopular opinion for those choosing to listen to a podcast that focuses on paranormal experiences and ghosts, but I actually only watch ghost hunting shows for entertainment. Now, that isn't to say I don't believe that maybe they sometimes get lucky and actually catch some paranormal evidence or something that's truly unexplained. But given they are television shows, I believe we all need to keep that in mind when we're watching. They are for entertainment purposes, they have a budget, and they're just trying to get more views. But this is likely what led me into wondering how it all started in the first place. So while researching the history of paranormal investigations, I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole. I found similarities to how paranormal investigations are portrayed by the media nowadays fascinating. First, let's talk a little bit about the very first evidence of ghosts in our history that I could find by just doing a simple Google search. So one article came from the Smithsonian, and it was believed that the first ever recorded depiction of a ghost, or at least how to get rid of ghosts, was actually carved into a clay tablet in ancient Babylon. So this clay tablet has been dated to be at least 3,500 years old, and apparently that wasn't the only ancient civilization that has records of ghosts and how to get rid of them. Writings were also found in ancient China, Mesoamerica, Egypt, Greece, Ireland, Scotland, India, and even Rome. Apparently, it was a common belief that if funeral rites were not done correctly, or if the spirits were angered in some way by the living, they could come back to haunt you. Even Winston Churchill had a ghost story. So apparently the story goes that while he was visiting the White House after World War II, he came out of having a bath and walked into his bedroom only to find the ghost of Abraham Lincoln smiling at him before vanishing into thin air. Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the author of Sherlock Holmes, was also a spiritualist supporter. Apparently, he would frequently visit mediums to study them and listen to their messages from the dead. Unfortunately for him, this fascination and curiosity eventually did land him in some hot water when he believed in a supposed photo that captured, quote, real fairies back in the late 1910s. Now, apparently a couple of girls were the ones that created the hoax photography, and they did eventually finally admit that they were lying, which led to Arthur Conan Doyle being ridiculed for believing in it and writing about it in the first place. But let's go back a bit further into, when the rise of spirituality actually started and what researchers believe was the cause of this sudden rise. So this was back in the mid-1980s. There was a sudden increase in the spirituality movement across America. In this particular movement, we're talking about the rise of people trying to talk to the dead. So this wasn't a rise in religions or, a rise in people going to church or building churches. This movement was really all about our fascination with being able to communicate with those that have left the physical world to go beyond the veil. Now, during this time, technology and inventions were transforming the world that people lived in. So the telegraph and phonograph were invented at that time, and this really allowed people's voices to be captured and sent long distances or recorded to be heard later. With the telegraph was also the adoption of the Morse code. So that was for communicating across long distances, which kind of also fed into the spiritualist movement. It just in how Morse code kind of was used later on. All of the science led to many different developments in the paranormal field. And some, of course, were honest developments, while others had more of an ill intent. Even with religion, it was starting to change at this time, as people were less afraid of, risking their life by checking out things that were outside of the Christian church. So remember in the late 1600s, people were afraid of being killed or being accused of witchcraft. So the 1800s, they started to have some freedom and some ability to talk about things outside of the Christian church without being worried about being killed. And another speculation into this reasoning behind the spirituality movement really is the rise in concern about what happens after death. Because around this time, death by infectious disease was becoming more common, and more children were starting to die. Although another speculation that I read was the number of children people were having were becoming smaller. So losing one, out of 3 was a bigger hit than 1 out of 11, as an example. So people really started to want to understand, what could be happening after death, or what could be happening to the loved ones that they lose after death. So that was another reason why a spiritualist movement became so common in America in the mid-1800s to early 1900s. Even the very first electronic voice phenomenon recording, also known as EVP, was actually by someone who thought they could hear their dead mother on a recording. So again, everyone was really interested in reconnecting with loved ones after they lost them. But let's go back to the 1800s. So scientists of the time were really interested in learning more about the paranormal. Likely thanks to the ability to now communicate with the living from far across distances, thanks to the new inventions, the thought of communicating with the dead became a real topic of study. And one article that I read even posed that Marie Curie might have done some experiments related to the paranormal. Now, 2 of the biggest names that actually were really pushing into paranormal investigations or really understanding the paranormal were William James and Harry Price. So let's start with William James. He was born in 1842 in New York City, and he has been named actually the father of American psychology. He was considered a philosopher as well, and as he became more interested in religion and spirituality, that was as his career progressed. So he actually started in the arts, in painting, I believe it was, and it later developed an interest to study chemistry, and then got into anatomy, and then this eventually led him to things like psychology, philosophy, and understanding the mind-body connection. He even wrote a 2-volume summary of the topic in 1890, And that book was called The Principles of Psychology, which apparently is like a pretty well-known book nowadays. However, he was not only interested in the connection between the mind and body and the study of psychology. He was also interested in the communications with the dead, which was becoming very popular at the time. Especially since him and his wife actually lost their son, Herman, in 1885 as an infant. So, a year before that, in 1884, he actually became one of the founders of the American branch of the Society for Psychical Research, which he helped form with people like William Fletcher Barrett, as well as other groups of scientists. So their goal was to scientifically investigate the claims of psychical phenomena. So this isn't only the, talking to the dead, so that not necessarily paranormal investigations, as we will talk about in a minute, but this is about things like seances, which were popular at the time, researching mediums and how they communicate with the dead, that kind of thing. And actually there was one medium in particular that he, became really interested in, Henry James that is, and that was Leonora Piper. So she actually became famous because of the interest that James had in her, because he began to study her methods during seances and was really impressed by her abilities to conjure up real details from people that sat with her. In fact, it was, I believe, his mother-in-law that had him visit her in the first place. Of course, it was right after his son's death, and he wanted to know how his son was doing, where he was, if, there was life after death and where he went. So Leonora Piper was actually the medium that he went to visit and ask those specific questions. And so Leonora had become a paid medium after she claimed to hear voices and delivered a message to a local judge through automatic writing. So if you watch any of the paranormal shows, you probably know what automatic writing is. It's supposedly the act of, writing without thought and letting messages come through. It's expected that these messages are from people, ghosts or the dead or whatever. So the claim was that she was hearing a voice, whenever she sits down to do this automatic writing. And in particular for the local judge, it was his recently deceased son. So she started doing this, more regularly, and she would make $1 per sitting. And the interesting part was after James came into contact with her and started to want to study her, then she was actually able to get up to $1,000 a year by the researchers of, the scientists and stuff, just for her services. So she suddenly became quite popular and high paid for the times. So she was a trance medium, but as I said, her preferred method of communication was automatic writing. Henry James studied 69 cases of Leonora's sittings, where she helped others through her mediumship. So after thoroughly reviewing the cases, he firmly believed, though, that she wasn't actually communicating with the dead. So Henry James eventually felt that, no, this isn't communication with the dead, that this is actually telepathic abilities. Remember, he really was interested in the mind-body connection. So he really firmly believed that she was picking up on either the thoughts of the people she was sitting with, or she was able to somehow read their energy or read their bodies to understand, information about their private lives. Now, of course, there was also speculation that she could have been getting information from people's private lives through their hired help. So through, the cleaning ladies or their maids or their butlers or whatever. Because seances and mediums really were a common thing for the more wealthy back in the time. They would have sitting rooms in their houses, and it would become like a Friday night thing to do. You would invite your friends over and you'd have a seance and bring a medium in. So it typically was for more wealthy. However, it couldn't be proven that she was getting that kind of information from the hired help. So we don't know. In the end, though, she was still able to make quite a bit of money from being a medium, primarily thanks to the interest that these scientists put in her in their research. Now, another popular scientist around that time was Harry Price. And actually, some consider Price to be the very first celebrity ghost hunter of our history. He was born in 1881 in London, although he had apparently claimed he grew up in a house in Shropshire. He's best known for his involvement in investigating fraud mediums and seances, but he is also well known for spending 1 year living in a haunted house and, creating a book after that experience. Price had said that his first paranormal experience occurred when he was 15 years old, while he was in an old manor house in Shropshire. Perhaps this is the house he claimed to grow up in, but I'm not really sure. I couldn't find that out. And then following the paranormal experience, he wrote plays and a drama about the experience that he had at 15. And he even formed the Carlton Dramatic Society. Later, attention came to him again as he started to claim an interest in space telegraphy, although nothing seemed to come out of this interest. Only an article written by himself of an experiment that he claimed to have done, but no proof was ever provided. So who knows if that actually, happened. And I know we aren't painting a pretty picture about Harry Price and his scientific research into the paranormal, but let's keep going. Although he spent many years exposing mediums as frauds during this time, as there were many, as maybe we'll get into in another episode, he is well known for his public investigation of the Borley Rectory in Essex, England. So this was the haunted house that he actually apparently lived in for a full year and documented his experiences in a book. Although there has been some speculations that perhaps, some of the people from the research facility might have played some tricks on him while he was there. But I didn't dig too much into that, so I'm not sure. As I said, Price was a member of the Society for Psychical Research due to his work debunking frauds, both mediums and those that claim to be able to take spirit photography. So if you haven't heard of spirit photography, that's primarily by William Hope, I think was the biggest one. And he was taking photos using, I think it was double plates. Like back then they used plates in their photography. And so he was using old plates, which he had taken pictures of people, in veils and in blankets. And then he would have them pressed onto photos of new people. So you could come and, that was his big thing, was you could come and get your picture taken with a spirit. So they debunked him. But after many disputes, Harry Price actually left the Society for Psychical Research and decided to form his own organization in 1925 called the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, which he managed to even convince the University of London Board of Studies in Psychology to later take over as the Council for Psychical Research. And I believe they even have a Harry Price library or haunted library or something, which has some of his books and things that he had collected. Now, what was really interesting to learn was that there's actually even a psychical researcher much closer to home. So Thomas Glendenning Hamilton, who was actually born in 1873 in Ontario, moved to Saskatchewan at age of 10, but then he later moved to Winnipeg, which is where he stayed. So I know not in Saskatchewan, but Winnipeg is really close. Apparently, in 1903, he obtained his medical degree from the Manitoba Medical College, specializing in internal medicine and obstetrics. Sorry, had trouble with that word. Around 1921, shortly after his youngest son died at 3 years old in 1919, he also began digging into the world of psychical research. So I believe that his son died of the flu outbreak during following the war. But I found it interesting that a lot of these big scientists, they really got into this psychical research and, trying to understand the paranormal after they lost a child. So it's something to, keep in mind, because we did talk about that earlier, that the spirituality movement could have been a result of these deaths that were happening because of the infectious diseases that were getting, coming back from the wars and from the different things that were happening. So anyway, he actually founded the Winnipeg Society for Psychic Research in 1931 and began to hold seances as experiments in his own home. What I found interesting about Hamilton was that he actually built a seance room, and it was considered a scientific seance room. And that's because he put up a whole bunch of these different cameras to take photography during the seances. And, he tried to make it really controlled environment so that, the mediums would get patted down and checked over before they were allowed into the room to make sure that they weren't trying to hide something on them. And so he did really try to control the environment, to try and get a real sense of what these mediums were doing and how they were communicating with the dead. And then he investigated many of the other psychical phenomena at the time. So it wasn't only seances, but it was mental telepathy, the Ouija board, table rapping and movement, bell boxes, automatic writing, direct voice, trances, a whole bunch of different things. The one I found the most fascinating, because I didn't even realize this was a true thing, was the ectoplasmic constructions. I know. Now it sounds like we're getting into, Ghostbuster movies, but ectoplasm was thought to be evidence of paranormal back then. And it was thought that mediums could somehow produce ectoplasm while they were in contact with the dead. But that's a whole other story, which maybe we'll get into another time. I don't know if Hamilton still has his seance house in Winnipeg. Obviously, Hamilton has passed since then, but I believe that they tried to do some research into, what exactly went on in the house, because his wife kept it up after he passed. And then I believe his children I don't think they took over doing the research, but they took over, all of the materials that were created and that kind of thing. So I don't know whatever happened of it, but I thought that was an interesting little piece to add to today's episode, given that it did happen not too far from us. Maybe someone as a listener will have some more information that they'll be able to share with me. So if you do, make sure that you check me out on social media platforms, or really if you have anything that you want to share with me, check me out. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all of the places that you find people on social media nowadays. I am under letter K, letter D, and then Kulpa, Kulpa. So make sure you go find me, connect with me, and let me know if you have any particular episodes that you want me to share on ParaGhoul Paranormal, or if you want to share experiences that you've had yourself, because I always love hearing paranormal stories, UFO stories, really anything to do with the unknown. So I will figure out a way to, get you to submit those, and maybe I'll have them in future episodes. But I think we're going to have to stop here because we're running out of time for today. So next time that we talk about paranormal history, I will make sure that we dive into, more about the seances and the hoaxes and the ectoplasm, because I think that is such a fascinating topic. Remember, I also have a Patreon where you can help support the podcast and help support any paranormal investigations and equipment. Because I don't currently have a lot of equipment and investigating does cost money to drive to places, I have created this Patreon. So if anyone wants to help support ParaGhoul Paranormal or anything else that we have going on, you can check it out. In the Patreon, I also go live once a month to answer questions or just talk with anybody that's a member. I also let you know about upcoming guests and episodes in case you want to have any questions answered during the show. And eventually, I'm sure there'll even be the option to buy ParaGhoul Paranormal merchandise. Okay, before we sign off, I want to say thank you to everyone listening. It's so much fun getting to research into these things and share them with you. Now, next week we're doing something a little different. We will be talking to hosts of another Regina-based podcast. So yes, we're going to have a guest episode next time. Kenton and Dylan will be joining me to talk UFOs and ghosts and other, mysteries, as well as talk about their own podcast, which is called Unsolved Canadian Mysteries. So make sure you tune in next week to listen to that one. I think it will be a really fun time, and I can't wait to have them on. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlights handy and your digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.